Good afternoon, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Army and Navy Club. Thank you all for joining us today to share our plans for commemorating the unique occasion in history that the centenary of the First World War represents, most particularly for communities across Britain, but also on an international level. My name's Stuart Biles. I'm Chief Executive of the History Press, the UK's largest specialist history publisher. We're proud to publish great books on local, specialist and national audiences. As you know, the next years will see an incredible uplift in interest in the First World War, with many general publishers seeing an opportunity. However crowded the sector becomes, we intend to ensure our unique perspective will deliver a substantial and lasting contribution to the nation's understanding of the Great War. We have 5 speakers this afternoon. Professor Peter Doyle, author of The First World War in 100 Objects. Peter is a military historian, geologist and prolific author, as well as co-secretary of the all-party Parliamentary War Heritage Group, which is actively supporting the British government's centenary celebrations. Lucy Gosling, author of Great War Britain, The First World War at Home, works at the Mary Evans Picture Library and has written substantially both in book form and for magazines. The History Press is looking forward to her new series, The First World War in Art, covering the work of people such as Bruce Bairnfather and Heather Robinson, amongst others. Heather? How about Heath? That'll do. Dr. Mike Pringle is author of one of our local history Great War Britain titles on Swindon. Mike is Director of Cultural Development for Forward Swindon, having worked extensively in the heritage and arts sectors. Lucy Moore is World War I project curator for Leeds Museums and is going to be one of the co-authors of our Great War Britain on Leeds. She has developed a range of freelance work, primarily in the numismatics areas. But to start, I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister's Special Representative for the Centenary, Minister Dr. Andrew Murrison, for coming to talk to us today about the importance of the centenary and setting our activities in contrast in the context of the nation's plan. The Minister is MP for South West Wiltshire, having served for 18 years in the Royal Navy, leaving with the rank of Surgeon Commander. So, without more ado, because we have great speakers here, would you please welcome the Minister now, Minister Dr. Andrew Murrison. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stuart, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to see so many people here today. I know many of you from the work that government's been doing over the past several months to prepare for the upcoming centenary, and I know we'll all be involved in one way or the other. We have less than a year to go until the start of the centenary of the war to end all wars, and I would like to set out my thinking on its anniversary, outline what government will do, and the philosophy underpinning its approach. Can I start by reading an extract from my book, Tommy This and Tommy That? Sadly, it's been published by a house other than the History Press, but I can assure you that it is available from all good booksellers. The Great War was a betrayal of the military covenant on a monumental scale. That it happened at all is an affront to all reason, a cataclysmic failure on the part of rulers and governments sustained by rhetoric and jingoism, so amply exposed by war poets like Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. However, if the potentates of 1914 had been given advance sight of the Butcher's Bill, it is arguable whether even they would have indulged their monstrous sense of vanity and sense of self. Now, some of that seems a little harsh on rereading, and it needs to be heavily contextualised. In citing war poets, I would not want to be associated with either what are being called the poets or the historians in the binary debate orchestrated by elements of the print media in relation to the centenary commemoration of the First World War. But the words and phrases I have used, monumental, cataclysmic failure, and Butcher's Bill, I hope convey a popular sense of horror associated with the war. Others I could have included would have been just war and necessary victory, and I'll come back to that shortly. I spent my early career on the front line of a very different war, the Cold War, patrolling the Iceland-Greenland UK gaps for Russian submarines, all very Red October. It didn't feel at the time like I was part of the consequentials of the two world wars my grandfather had served in at sea. But it certainly was. The point is, the First World War is the defining event of our time, and it is best that we try to understand its causes, conduct, and consequences. That endeavour lies at the heart of the centenary that is about to break upon us. Indulge me with just a little bit more anecdote. Let me tell you about a rather remarkable bike ride that took place last month. Two guys, Medwin Parry and Dougie Bancroft, rode Triumph Trophy motorbikes to every one of the country's 51 so-called thankful villages, parishes whose young men all returned from the First World War alive. Their aim was to raise £51,000 for the Royal British Legion and to present each village with its own plaque, a small substitute for the war memorial that each one of them thankfully did not require, at least at that time. The fact that just 51 out of so many thousands of villages in the UK and none in Scotland or Northern Ireland were spared fatalities gives us a sense of the extent and breadth of the sacrifice. So as the Prime Minister said nearly a year ago when he announced the government's plans, our first duty is to remember. But remember what? Remembrance is not recollection. The Sunday closest to Armistice Day is Remembrance Sunday, not Recollection Sunday. Remembrance, you see, involves much more than simply bringing to mind experiences that few of us have. It is an opportunity to acknowledge the fallen, consciously reflect on the horror of war, and to resolve to avoid it. We can also give thanks and be glad in the spirit of those 51 villages that peace restored, the great majority returned to raise families, our families, although all too many, don't forget, with enduring mental or physical infirmity that changed the course of their lives and that of their families to an extent that will never be quantified. So we commemorate the Great War because of its scale. Commemorate it too because of its length. Over by Christmas it never was. Commemorate it also because the drumbeat of key battles screams out for it. The Somme, Jutland, Gallipoli and Passchendaele sear our national consciousness. Others, less firmly lodged in the public imagination, like Amiens, were crucially important as game changers in the course of the war, and yet others have special salience in particular parts of our country, and the Battle of Loos springs to mind. And we commemorate it finally, because with the last of its veterans, the Great War is passing from the contemporary to the historical. And this matters, because it's the point at which we risk disconnection from the defining event of the 20th century, and missing the opportunity to explore its causes, conduct, and consequences. Missing an opportunity, perhaps, to balance and de-trivialise the Blackadder take on history that has been in the ascendant since the half-centenary in 1964. Anniversaries are, of course, artificial things, with no significance in themselves, although my wife, I suspect, might take a rather dusty view of that. But like it or not, they, and centenaries in particular, are an open invitation to plumb the historical record, to challenge mythology and seek new perspectives. And it would be very wrong to miss this one. But we should acknowledge that people will experience the centenary in many different ways and have widely different expectations of it. I'm sure that hundreds of fine books will be written. I've been presented with two already this afternoon, and thousands of articles will be published, as well as tens of thousands of hours of broadcast coverage of events and commissioned work. We've seen the start of it already, and the history press will be in the thick of it. Organisations and individuals will contribute their own ideas and initiatives to this truly national and international moment in our history. This is unsurprising and entirely right. Some of those ideas may discomfort us, and we may individually or corporately disagree with them, but find expression they must. The role of government in this centenary, and I can't stress this strongly enough, is to encourage and help make it all happen, but to do so without prescription. It is most emphatically not the role or duty of government in our 21st century liberal democracy to be handing down approved versions of history. So what will government do? Well, first and foremost, there will be national events to capture the moment and set the tone. They will reflect the reality of Britain as it was, so very much with a Commonwealth look and feel. The centrepiece of the commemorations more generally will be the reopening of the Imperial War Museum in London, following the £35 million refurbishment of the First World War galleries. As most of you know, it was founded in 1917 to record the then still continuing conflict, and it seems entirely fitting that there should be substantial public funding for the project that will breathe new life and fresh perspective into this wonderful institution. There will be an enduring educational legacy funded with over £5 million from the Department for Education and the Department for Communities and Local Government, which will allow students and teachers from each maintained school in England to visit First World War battlefields and undertake research on people local to them involved in the war. The Heritage Lottery Fund, in the news quite starkly this week, will provide at least 15 million, including a new 6 million community project fund to enable young people working in their communities to conserve, explore and share local heritage of the First World War. There will also be at least 10 million in a programme of cultural events as part of the centenary commemorations over the 4 years. Jenny Waldman, the creative producer for London 2012, has been appointed director of this programme and will work with cultural organisations and partners across Britain to deliver it. And she will have heavyweight backing to help steer and shape the project. Vicky Hayward, chairman of the RSA and former executive director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and Tony Hall, director of the BBC, will be on the board that supports her. All of this has a common theme: bringing the history to life for everyone, including people from all our communities and all walks of life, some of which may feel this all has nothing to do with them. Government will use the centenary to further its diplomatic endeavours. It would be a supreme irony, would it not, if the anniversary of such a diplomatic failure challenged or failed to advance peace and concord. But the British press has not been able to resist the temptation to suggest that the government is acting the role of Basil Fawlty. Don't mention the war is just too delicious for them, and they cannot restrain themselves. But let me assure you that tweaking disobliging history is the business of novelists and a particular genre of journalist, not government. Can I assure you too that government will seek reconciliation wherever it can, not only with the former Central Powers, but also with partner nations in Europe and in the former Empire, with whom we share complex and nuanced history. Most of us can probably agree that the great majority of our countrymen going to war in 1914 had a strong sense of doing the right thing. If familiar with the doctrines of St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, they would have said, and I agree, that they engaged in a just war. I know my grandfather felt that way. Even as Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey was observing lamps going out across Europe that would not be relit in his time, the bulk of Britain's political leaders under Herbert Asquith were confident that resisting a militaristic aggressor in the way proposed satisfied the moral preconditions for a just war. I'm no moral philosopher, but we can tick those preconditions off. Britain was a competent authority. It had the right intentions. It felt war was a last resort, that it would win, that it was acting proportionately. So, blimpish figures, wantonly and callously consigning other men's sons to hideous deaths, the frock coats and brass hats of 1914 were not. Read the transcript for the Commons debate on the 3rd of August 1914 and touch their agony. Compare, if you will, the quality of that debate to ours on Syria 2 weeks ago. Our predecessors in the long expectant summer of 1914 could not have foreseen the consequences or the terrible cost of what they were about to embark upon. But finally, after military victory, came political failure, and that leaves a lesson for us all. Thank you.
Well, thank you once again, Minister, for including us in your schedule. I know that your insight into the national commemorations will have inspired us all and confirm that we can make a significant contribution to the events over the next 5 years. So thank you once again. I know you have to leave in a moment, so we really appreciate you coming. Thank you. Would you like to go now, or shall I?
I'd like to stay, but I'm being dragged away, so
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Round of applause. So, our next speaker is Professor Peter Doyle, author of the forthcoming First World War and 100 Objects, who's going to share with us the stories of the Great War in